I'm Gilbert Cruz, editor of the New York Times Book Review, and this is the Book Review Podcast. This week, MJ Franklin is back to host the Book Review Book Club, and up for discussion, The Talented Mr. Ripley by Patricia Highsmith. A great American crime novel, it has been adapted for the screen several times, including into a film starring Matt Damon, Gwyneth Paltrow, Jude Law, Philip Seymour Hoffman, and Cate Blanchett. That film celebrates its 25th anniversary later this year. Most recently, The Talented Mr. Ripley was made into a gorgeous black and white series for Netflix, which stars Andrew Scott. Let's go to our book club conversation now.
Hello, and welcome back to another book club episode of the Book Review Podcast. I'm MJ Franklin. I'm an editor here at the New York Times Book Review, and this month's book club, we're talking about The Talented Mr. Ripley. We chose this book for our July book club because I was thinking about summer reading, and I'm always torn between two mindsets when I choose something for the summer. On the one hand, in the summer, I want to use my leisure time to kind of catch up on a classic that I've been meaning to dive into and just haven't had the chance yet. And on the other hand, I'm like, I don't want to do any dutiful reading. It's vacation. It's the summer. I want to dive into something fun and propulsive and just enjoy. The Talented Mr. Ripley accomplishes both. It's a classic, but also it's this tense, high-octane thriller that a lot of readers, I think, would call unputdownable. I know I would. Spoiler alert of how I'm feeling about this book. So I thought it's perfect for a summer book club. Joining me to discuss this novel are not two, but three remarkable guests and colleagues. I'm going to go around the house. First, we have Tina Jordan, deputy editor of the New York Times Book Review. Hi, Tina.
Hi, MJ.
Thank you for joining us.
Oh, my pleasure.
Readers can't see this, but you have with you a beautiful old copy of Ripley. It's gray, and can you tell us more about it?
It's part of a beautiful boxed set that probably came out a quarter century or more ago of all the Ripley books. And when you see the volumes in the box, there's like a design on the back of the spine.
I love this. I am so jealous. I have a new paperback, but that is a stunning edition. Also with us is our thriller columnist, Sarah Lyall. Hi, Sarah.
Hi.
Sarah, in addition to writing our thriller column and being our thrillers expert, you're also a writer at large here, and you're leaving for Paris tomorrow to cover the Olympics, correct?
Yes, I am.
So, one, I wanted to say thank you for squeezing us in before you go. And then two, this feels really fitting because like one of Tom's great dreams is to travel to Paris with Dickie. So I like to say you're getting into character.
I'm looking for a colleague maybe or someone I can just push gently into the Seine while I'm there.
And also with us is Sadie Stein, a fellow editor here at the Book Review. Hi, Sadie.
Hello.
Sadie, you're one of those readers who I feel like reads so widely and so voraciously, nonfiction, literary fiction, genre fiction, and we'll get into this later, but based on your response when I asked you to join this book club, you're a big Ripley fan, correct?
I am, yeah.
Okay, so great. So that's what I say. We have a stacked powerhouse lineup of experts to dive into this book. But before we do, I have two programming notes and then a synopsis, and then I'm going to stop monologuing, I promise. The programming notes. One, just a heads up, there will be spoilers in this discussion. So if you don't want spoilers, go read the book and then come back. If you don't care about spoilers, stay with us, but there will be spoilers. Programming note number two. This discussion will be primarily about the first book in the Ripley series. We may touch on some of the later books, and we will touch on the film and TV adaptations as well, but the anchor for this book club discussion is the first book, but that's to echo out that general spoiler alert. There may be some spoiler alerts about some of the series and all that good stuff. And now, without further ado, my synopsis, and then I'll be quiet for a little while, I promise. The Talented Mr. Ripley is Patricia Highsmith's classic 1955 psychological thriller about a young scammer named Tom Ripley. When the novel opens, he is a petty fraudster in New York, bouncing from place to place, and then he runs into Herbert Greenleaf. Herbert is the rich father of the socialite Dickie Greenleaf. Dickie has absconded to Italy and is refusing to return, even as his mother grapples with leukemia. Tom and Dickie met years ago, so Herbert, believing the two men are closer than they actually are, offers to pay Tom a handsome fee to go to Italy and convince Dickie to come home. Talk about a dream job. Go to Italy, spend time, come back with my socialite son. Tom goes to Italy, but rather than bring Dickie back, he tells Dickie about his father's wish, and then the two of them decide to use the money for basically an extended summer holiday. Meanwhile, Dickie has also struck up this friendship pseudo-romance with a young American writer named Marge, who Tom does not get along with. And all the while, Tom's jealousy of Dickie and his lavish life grows and grows, culminating in him murdering Dickie, stepping into his shoes, literally, and living Dickie's life. The rest of the novel then is about Tom trying to be Dickie while also keeping the police off his trail. Sadie, Tina, Sarah, did I miss anything? Anything you'd add to that synopsis?
No, that was great. There's one other murder there, but we're not going to tell you who gets murdered.
The thriller, the suspense already starts.
Mm-hmm.
So with that, I kind of just want to open it up to the table and just do a general temperature check. What are your thoughts about the book? Love it, hate it, feel ambivalent about it, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I'm going to start with you, Sarah. What are your thoughts about the talented Mr. Ripley?
I love this book. I read this a long time ago. I don't really remember when. And as I went back to it, I was struck by the contrast between how I feel now and how I felt then. I think then I was much more interested in the plot, which is potboilery and crazy, and you don't really expect it, and it feels sort of like an adventure story. You can read it that way. I was much more struck in this instance by Highsmith's artistry in presenting us with this character who does such unsavory things, and yet who we root for. She gets so deeply inside his head that we follow along with what he's doing without a lot of extraneous sort of explanations for it or, efforts to really, really psychoanalyze him the way we might in a book. The way some writers would introduce this sort of character. And I was really struck by her restraint and how carefully this book unfolds.
Next, I want to go over to you, Sadie. What are your general top-level thoughts about this book?
I, too, hadn't read it since probably college, so it was so fun to come back. And it's just as enjoyable as I remembered, but I think I appreciate the different facets to the book now.
Interesting.
For one thing, I couldn't get over just how incredibly affordable everything was. And that aside, just how he could get away with this lifestyle undetected, the absence of technology. Because when I would have first read this, we were in a much less digital age. So now the fact that you could sustain this for months and years even.
I would read a copy of this book with Marge set now having a version of Find My Friends. Like, that's the end of the book.
Exactly. Basically, the entire plot hinges on not having face recognition. Yeah. This time around, I was really interested to read the allusions to Henry James's 1903 novel, The Ambassadors, because I had, in the time since, read that she deliberately modeled at least a setup on that. And in fact, she mentions it a couple of times. There's a point at which Mr. Greenleaf has told Tom to look it up in their drunken marathon session, and Tom kind of makes a half-hearted effort to find it on the Cunard Liners library, but then because he's traveling first class, he's not allowed to check out a book. But it's not very similar, but the premise of the James novel is indeed that kind of socially precarious, you could say social climber, is given a commission to go to Europe and collect kind of a young scion and bring him back to work in the family business. And then he's beguiled by Europe and becomes a total aesthete. The difference is he's a very moral character.
Is that book just as propulsive as The Talented Mr. Ripley?
Give or take a few hundred pages of Henry James.
Very fair, very fair. What about you, Tina? What are your top-level thoughts about this book?
My top-level thoughts about this book are actually much like Sarah's. I think I, too, hadn't read it in decades. And my takeaway, and the thing I always said to people was, what she does such a good job doing is getting you to like this sociopath. Sociopath? I always get confused.
Yeah, I'm not sure.
Anyway, and so reading it this time, I was actually paying attention to how she plants the seeds and how she does that. And it was fascinating.
What are your thoughts about how does she do it? Like, what were you picking up on? What were you observing?
I mean, she makes him likable in all these tiny little ways, right? Like, he's so lovely to Dickie Greenleaf's ailing mother. he's in Brooks Brothers before he leaves to go on the trip. And the Greenleafs have told him, we'd like you to put on our account X, Y, and Z for Dickie. And he sees something he really likes. And it would be really easy for him to put it on their account. But no, he pays with his own money. And so there's just like this accumulation of details where he is doing the right thing or the nice thing.
I was so struck by that as well, that he does understand what morality is. He does have a sense of right and wrong, and he tries to adhere to some level of rightness. And then it starts to go awry. And when it goes awry, I think you guys would probably agree, you don't really know if it's been inside him all along that he would go in this direction, and you kind of start thinking it has been. You start thinking that all the stuff you've seen before was really just a put-on character, but his real character is the one without morality who wants just what he wants, and all of this other stuff has been a way to get it.
I totally agree. I think that it's all put on, like he knows these niceties and he is doing these things because he has a motive.
Yeah, it's like almost like a survival technique or a tool to put all of this on.
Oh, yeah. He has no innate understanding. He has no moral compass. So like putting on someone else's suit or passport, coloring his hair, he tries to guess in every instance what a normal person would do.
But at the same time, that kind of contradicts, though, what you were saying, Tina, is that like it would be very easy for him to put on the Greenleaf's bill, like this shirt that he wants, no one would notice. So like that, in the same way that these bad actions are coming from somewhere, these good actions are.
And also I was struck by his original forgery in New York before he set sail. He's not actually cashing he's forging people's checks. He gets them to write checks and he doesn't cash them. And he does it really just because he thinks it's kind of fun. He enjoys the deception, but he's not defrauding them.
So I'm going to morph my question a little bit and throw it out to the table, which is like, what did you make of Tom? Tina, you mentioned that you were rooting for him, even as he was kind of doing these bad things. The book makes you root for a sociopath. What did you think, Sadie and Sarah? Did you root for him? Did you like him? Did you dislike him?
I don't like him, and I kept wanting him against my knowledge of the plot. I kept wanting him to get caught. Largely because I had forgotten just how vicious he is towards Marge and his true disgust and loathing towards her, not to mention the cruelty he later exhibits towards both Dickie's parents and Marge, and how much sick pleasure he takes in twisting the knife.
Actually, that was one thing that I got caught up on too, which is, so I had never read this book before and I greatly loved it. I found it so... for me, this book was divided into two. I think you, Sarah or Tina, you might have mentioned this. The first time you read it, you were thinking about the plot and the propulsive aspects of this book. And then the second time you were thinking about Tom as a character. For me, I was also thinking about that, but just in one reading. And for me, the dividing line was the death of Dickie. For the first half, I'm just like interested in watching Tom kind of like out of his league, but trying very hard. And in some ways, he has this power because he's scamming everybody and no one knows that. So that's a type of power. But in the other, he gets sick all the time. And when he first lands, he doesn't have the right shoes and all of this stuff is happening. So he's kind of out of his league. And you're just watching him try to fit in. And I found myself pulled just like character study. And then he kills Dickie. And then for me, that's when it switched. And I was like, okay, Tom is crazy and cruel. And now I just want to see, like, is he going to get caught and how? And then those were when the pages kept turning. But that cruelty, and specifically to Marge, what you were saying, Sadie, is what stood out to me. There are instances where he is writing these kind of horrible letters to Marge as Dickie, knowing it's going to hurt Marge. And then he'll see Marge later and he's like, I enjoyed looking at her face as she was kind of grappling with all of this stuff.
But here's what's interesting about that. Marge doesn't end the book, full of tragic sorrow. She's sort of like, this was a weird thing. I thought I loved him. He turned out to be kind of a jerk. And now maybe he's killed himself. But he's mostly mean about her off stage. He doesn't tell her all the awful things he's thinking about her. And one of the things that's interesting about his attitude toward her is that he doesn't like people who are sort of boring, unattractive, badly dressed. At some point he talks about, I think, her like bovine-like figure. So his thoughts are really cruel, but it's all part of the same thing where he likes luxury, he likes beauty, he likes a certain level of conversation, and she doesn't provide any of those things. So I don't think he was that overtly cruel to her the way Sadie does.
Well, just when I don't want to give away too much, but when he gives her reason to believe that she could have caused Dickie's suicide, which is a situation of his own manufacture. Plus, we're taking his word for it that she's kind of unfazed by this. He dismisses her from the jump as you say, kind of bovine and unsensitive and not an aesthete in the way that he and Dickie are. And also, you can't help wondering if he doesn't just despise her as a romantic rival and has projected so much onto her, or that he finds women unappealing physically.
Well, he does find women unappealing.
He talks
and
about her bra and how it repulses him.
What about you, Tina? What do you make of the Marge of it all?
I agree that he's not attracted to women. And there's a really compelling scene where where he sees the two of them kissing through a window. I don't know if you remember this scene. And he's so taken aback. He's like, that does not look like a first kiss. And he's horrified. He's more horrified at Dickie than at Marge, though. Marge is he's written Marge off already.
Interesting. So I want to jump right in. What do we make of the queerness of Tom, which I know a lot of people read him as queer. Patricia Highsmith said he wasn't for a long time, correct?
Well, presumably it's because she was hiding her own sexuality at that point, and the undercurrent is clearly there. And one of the things he's so upset by is that Marge accuses him of being queer. And it's clear to the reader, maybe with our sensibility now, that he was. Because, at one point, remember, he's looking at those hot guys on the beach, the acrobats, and he just likes men better than women in general.
And honestly, it's not a spoiler to say in the later books he's married. But there's just absolutely no spark between him and his wife.
And then there's that part where Marge writes, she thinks she's writing to Dickie, and she says, I don't know if he's gay or not, but if he's nothing in some ways, that I find weirder than anything else, because what is he getting out of any of this?
Yeah. For me, the queerness, so I never read this before, and I knew about the conversation about his queerness. For me, the queerness started in the very first chapter with Herbert Greenleaf. They meet at this bar, and he's being followed, and Tom is like, is this the police or is this someone trying to cruise? And I kind of hope it's someone trying to cruise because I don't want to be arrested and I can deal with someone like a man cruising me. And then he meets Herbert, and Herbert puts in the request to go get Dickie, and then they spend the rest of the night together, and there's a blackout, and he wakes up and he's getting into a cab from Herbert's house. And for me, it reminded me of the secret queer scene of The Great Gatsby. Do you remember this? Where is at the party, Nick is at the party with Tom and everyone on Long Island, and they get kicked out, and Tom goes back with an artist that was at the party, and they get into an elevator, and the elevator man says, please stop pulling on the lever, and then there's a blackout, and then Nick is looking at the man in bed, and then there's another blackout, and he wakes up in a train station. There's veiled sexual encounter happens in that book, and the tone of the scene with Herbert here reminded me of that.
Well, it's interesting that you bring up Gatsby, because in some ways, Tom is a sort of Gatsby-esque character, isn't he? He's someone who wants to reinvent himself. He's someone who thinks you can start over with a clean slate, is what he says. And the notion in his case of an American leaving America and reinventing himself as a rich, worldly American abroad is, a theme we've seen in literature for ages and ages. And I do think there's a parallel with Gatsby there.
Interesting. So there really is so much to dig into here, and we will dig into more, but first I think we should take a quick break. And we're back. This is the Book Review Podcast. I'm MJ Franklin. I'm joined by Sarah Lyall, Tina Jordan, and Sadie Stein, and we're discussing The Talented Mr. Ripley by Patricia Highsmith. Before we jump back into our conversation, though, I want to read some reader comments. Mark Siegel from Atlanta writes, The Talented Mr. Ripley is technically a crime novel since its main character commits crimes. But to me, It is a literary novel that explores the nature of character itself. Highsmith wisely offers no explanations. A line from Wallace Stevens may come closest to capturing Ripley. He is, quote, the nothing that is not there and the nothing that is. That is terrifying, and that is what makes this book so great. Because this is a book club, I saw that a reader flagged a counterpoint to this, so I wanted to read that to you. Mike from Pittsburgh writes, to the contrary, Highsmith tells us plenty. She plants clues for the curious reader. Highsmith allows us to appreciate behavioral sources for Tom's alienation. Another reader, Bill Gates. Not that Bill Gates, the spelling is different. But if you are that Bill Gates, hi Bill Gates. Bill Gates writes, the thrills are so captivating and literary that thoughts of ethics go out the window, or should I say out the boat. You know it's fiction and you go along for the wild ride. And then Florence McCambridge from Toronto writes, as someone reading this book for the first time, what I find interesting is how Patricia Highsmith has made me care about Ripley and what happens to him. She shares a quote about Ripley crying, about becoming himself, and then she continues on. I felt bad for him. He's living the life of his dreams as someone else, and the thought he will now have to go back to being himself, seeing the world as himself, that thought makes him cry. Truly an incredible moment in the book for me. I'm in awe of Patricia Highsmith. So those are some reader comments, but now let's pick up our conversation. What are you still thinking about in terms of Ripley?
Can we get back to the notion of whether we care if he gets caught or not? I thought that was so interesting. I was so anxious, even though I knew from reading it before what was going to happen, that this time the police were going to nab him. And I started thinking of the other thing that we all would know about that was similar, which is Psycho. Because, of course, in Psycho, it opens with someone stealing money, and then you worry on her behalf that she will be caught by the authorities. And I think it's so interesting the way these, Hitchcock in that case, in this case, Highsmith, can make us care about that. And I think it's this seeing it from the person's perspective. And then I was thinking about the Hitchcock movie Rope, which is from the perspective of the investigator who wants to catch these killers, make them confess, prove that they committed this murder. And in that movie, you're tense and nervous that he won't be able to pull it off. So it's a really interesting authorial technique. Wish I knew how to do it.
And, Grim Green referred to her as a poet of apprehension rather than jump scares. And that's really true. She just builds dread and the tension just ratchets up and up and up.
But isn't it interesting that when you compare this to other books or movies about people being like hunted by the police, in this case, your own dread as a reader isn't always matched at all by Tom himself. He actually enjoys the cat and mouse with the police. He actually is bored when he thinks nobody's on his tail. And that's a really interesting element of him that I hadn't picked up the first time either.
I thought I remembered from reading the book all those years ago and from seeing the movies that his decision to kill Dickie is just like spur of the moment. They're out in the boat. But of course, that's not right. As I was reading the book this time, I'm like, oh, he thinks about it on the train.
There are long scenes of him being like, I could do this. But now my question is how? It's so meditated.
Yeah.
I mean, one thing I found really interesting was I sort of remembered his being a better strategist than he is, because it's sort of funny the times in which he does plan and for how long he plans, because his schemes aren't going to work out long term without a tremendous amount of luck, which he tends to have. But it's part of what stressed me out reading it is that you don't trust him to make good or smart or logical decisions necessarily. They are logical to him, but
I think he's good at on the spur of the moment decisions.
He's great at improvising, as we know.
But I also think he's making so many sentimental decisions. He wants to carry Dickie's rings with him, even though he knows that they could theoretically be evidence.
No, he wants to be Dickie. He has become Dickie. That's why he's carrying the rings, right?
Yeah, that imbues him with Dickie-ness.
But then even when he's like, I can't wear them and I could get caught, so I'm going to sew them into the suitcase. For me, it felt like there was he wanted to, in addition to be Dickie, wanted to have some type of memorabilia to stick.
Well, he liked Dickie's stuff. Dickie had beautiful clothes. Dickie had these nice pieces of jewelry. He had good furniture. And he feels that having these possessions is what he deserves himself, and that's part of what he wants when he turns into Dickie.
You're bringing up that thing of keepsakes. Reminded me of one of several things I wanted to ask you guys about. Because she kind of makes a point of saying it's in this box with other things that he loved that he carried with him. And do we think those are souvenirs? I mean, on the one hand, there's the implication that these are his first murders. But do we think that's true? Or what are all these other objects?
I think it's true. I mean, if this were a real horror book, it would be teeth of other people he killed, right? But I think this is the first taste of murder for Tom.
So what do you think the other things are? What do you think they signify? Because she makes a point of sort of phrasing it in her oblique way such that one, or at least I paused and reread and thought I was supposed to mark it.
I don't know.
Maybe one of his nice forged letters to the IRS that he was so proud of. What's so interesting is he's so good at shape-shifting. I loved the scenes where he dyes his hair a little bit. He speaks Italian worse as Tom than he would as Dickie. And he knows exactly, how they would use the subjunctive or not use it, what vocabulary they would have. He practices the signature over and over again. And so he does want to be Dickie, but actually I think he quite likes the shifting around from persona to persona. And it's so fascinating when, after being Dickie for a while, he realizes he has to go back to being Tom because Dickie's accused of Tom's murder. And he has people all over the city who think when they come up to his room, they're either going to see Dickie or Tom. And you just remember who they're talking to. And he's always saying, oh, he just left 5 minutes ago. And if you go to that restaurant, and I think he loves that so much.
I think more than anything, he doesn't want to be Tom. And I have this quote that I wrote down. Patricia Highsmith writes, he felt sad. He was not afraid, but he felt that identifying himself as Thomas Phelps Ripley was going to be one of the saddest things he'd ever done in his life. For me, I did think that Tom was very cruel, but these are the moments that I started really rooting for him and yearning for him, because I feel like so many of us have felt that feeling of not wanting to be ourselves. That is not to say that we should kill our friends and then impersonate them, but there is this pathos to Tom and what he's doing and what's animating him that I felt was so relatable.
Plus, it seems kind of easy. If you have the chutzpah, you can kind of get away with quite a bit. And so
Sadie,
much of it depends on his just having the gall. And even the cops keeping, he'd have to have been really, out of control, self-confident to have kept forging checks. It depends on people just not being able to get into the head of someone this sociopathic. And part of what's interesting about him and Dickie is that, yeah, he's great at putting on the mannerisms and the costumes and stuff, but yet he can't actually put himself in a headspace where he could conceivably care for Marge, for instance, or because he has no real sense of, I think, of emotional attachment himself. So he can only kind of put together his idea of what it would be and a very surface idea, and his own limitations in a way make it hard.
He's essentially very lonely, and he writes about that a lot. And then he doesn't mind being alone so much because he loves beauty so much. I was also struck by, in the middle of all this stuff, when you and I, had we murdered someone and were on the run, would just be at home filled with anxiety. He's like, oh, look how beautiful that building is, and the art in this city is so wonderful. I'm going to spend the day looking at these old churches. Pretty cool customer.
There's one way you can interpret that, he's this dreamer, right? He can't help but be overwhelmed by beauty. On the other hand, it's he's so detached and so sociopathic that, for him, this murder means so little. How do you interpret that?
I think he's an aesthete. I think that's all he cares about, and he's missing some kind of emotional chip that everyone else has, but he's not a sadist. I don't think he enjoys torturing people. It's all for his own, ends, which is to be a rich guy in Europe with a lot of money.
You don't think he's a little bit of a sadist towards Marge?
No, I don't think he's torturing her on purpose, actually. I think he toys with her in his own head and enjoys that. But I don't think he enjoys watching her suffer.
See, you and I disagree there. I think you have a lot more sympathy for him than I do. On this reading, certainly, for me.
Do we all think that his Aunt Dottie, who raised him, is responsible for the way he is now?
I think that she's probably responsible for his dramatic response about being called queer.
Because every time someone does that, he has to kill them, basically.
Oh, yeah. And the background is that Tom's parents died when he was a kid, and he lived with this Aunt Dottie who was really horrible to him and cruel to him and called him names and said he was a sissy, I think is the quote.
And that his father was.
And that his father was. And there seems to be a lot of internalized trauma that Tom has not unpacked yet.
But maybe if we were to meet her, she'd say, well, I always knew because he loved to torture animals.
Oh, my God.
Oh, and unpacking. Remember, she says he loves packing, repacking the suitcases, and he'll do it over several days. So that, because he loves the beautiful things and because maybe he likes packing things away.
Interesting.
I felt the way about him the way sometimes when you think about people who are really, really good at embezzling or they do, huge pyramid schemes or whatever. Like if he spent any of his effort doing this for good or whatever, he could earn a lot of money. He's just smart enough to make a good living, a legitimate way.
Like in Catch Me If You Can.
But he's spending all of his energy, and it takes a lot of energy to impersonate essentially two people at the same time, elude a whole bunch of friends of those people and the cops at the same time and get away with it. And that's, I just wonder about these people who he really never wants to go straight.
Yeah.
And he never will.
And he
right?
doesn't. He doesn't. And in fact, in the subsequent books, again, without giving anything away, like impersonation is a big part of how he makes his living.
Yeah, I actually have a question about that, which is without giving everything away, for readers who have read the first book in the series, what should they know? What should they be anticipating about what comes later on in the books?
Well, he hasn't learned any lessons.
Well, he's learned that he can get away with it, and that it's really fun, and that the way to stave off what he hates most of all, which is boredom and drabness, is to continue to live on the edge. He really likes that little space between everything's okay and things are going to really turn bad on a dime.
Since we were talking about the books down the line, I want to pivot a little bit and ask, have you seen the TV movie adaptations? I'm curious your thoughts about how this type of character translates to screen, which order you think that we should read or watch. I just want to pivot to adaptations. I'm going to start with you, Tina. Have you seen either of the adaptations?
There have been more than two, I think, but I've seen them all. It's Netflix, right? The most recent one. I thought it was fabulous.
Really?
I thought it was the best one yet. The really interesting thing about it is that, like all great adaptations, it makes you think about the book in different ways. And I don't think it spoils the book. I think you could actually do them in either order. Like, I had so much fun going back to the book now after having seen the Netflix series and picking up on all these tiny little things.
Like what? Like what did the series kind of bring out?
I think the series brought out how his character is just not, I hate to go back to this, but he's not a completely evil person, right? Mm-hmm. There's so much ambivalence in him.
Interesting. I haven't seen the series yet, and I'm very curious. I just haven't because of time.
I can't remember the actor's name. He's perfect for the part.
It's Andrew Scott.
Oh, it's Andrew
so
Scott.
I feel like that's the question you need here is you need to find the perfect actor to play this very complicated person. And you're saying you think Andrew Scott was great at it.
He was great at it. He's not too good looking.
But he also has a really sort of sinuous charm, doesn't he? I don't know if you saw him in the Sherlock TV series as well.
I didn't.
He plays Moriarty, and he plays him like a psychopath, like a really brilliant psychopath. He's one of the scariest characters I've ever seen in a TV show. And of course, Andrew Scott also played the hot priest in Fleabag. We all love him.
And he's so charming.
Yeah, and he's so charming, and he's a little shape-shifty as well.
Yeah,
and you need
totally.
someone who can pick up all that ambiguity in the same thing.
All that chameleon-like stuff, completely.
So then, Sarah, have you seen the series?
No. know, but I'm excited. I started to see that it was in black and white, and that kind of put me off.
Don't let that put you off. It put me off too, because my first thought was, of all the things that should be filmed in color,
Europe,
Italy, the 50s.
In the summer, in the warmth.
And the Minghella film is really beautiful, whatever you think about it. Like, the colors are so vivid, and they shot it, I think, in Positano, and it really,
And that's the one with Matt Damon playing Ripley,
and
right?
Jude Law.
And Jude Law plays
Paltrow.
Dickie.
Yeah, so let's dive into that movie. Oh, first, Sadie, have you seen the series?
I have, and I liked it a lot. I thought it corrected some of the movie, it's hard because it's shorthand, and obviously they have to skip over a lot, but I was struck when I rewatched the film from the 90s. Some of the casting is really good. Like, I think we can all agree that Jude Law is pretty perfect in that part. I found it strange that they made him really explicitly straight in the movie, to the point where they inserted a B-plot of his having implicitly, like, impregnated a local girl.
I have not seen the movie either. I feel like I've seen parts of the movie, but not that.
But removing a kind of important piece of ambiguity, besides everything else. What I will say is that the first adaptation, I think, which was in French, starred Alain Delon. And speaking of casting it too handsome, he's supposed to be able to move through like all of Europe's capitals without being noticed. And it was Alain Delon. So
it's like, not possible. Not possible. What about you, Sarah? Tina, have you seen the movie, and what are your thoughts about the film adaptation?
My memory is seeing sort of half the movie, and I thought Matt Damon was a really miscast Ripley, because he's not nasty enough. I think he was in his late 20s. He'd maybe just come off of Saving Private Ryan or something. He couldn't get over the sort of wholesomeness I associate with him in this character. I was thinking who I would want. I think maybe Ryan Gosling would be good, because he can play sort of, he can tone down his appeal. He can play a little bit nasty. He played a psychopath years ago in a movie with Sandra Bullock, which, if you'll remember, also started a romance between the two of them, even though she's way older than him. So we approve of him even more. But I think he'd be good, because you need someone here who can also charm. And I don't think Matt Damon is charming enough in that way to play that role.
Also, correct me, I might be misremembering, but wasn't Gwyneth?
Yeah, she's Marge.
And that's also so
ridiculous.
That's even worse than Matt Damon is.
Wait, why?
Because
she's too beautiful,
she's so glamorous,
charming, and she looks so good, and you can't look down on her at all. She was like, everybody should have wanted to marry her, even if you were gay.
Oh, her costumes are fabulous too. They have her in all these peasant blouses. It's really good.
It's like that meme that goes around when someone is cast in a historical film, and it's like, that face is the face of someone who has seen an iPhone. It sounds like, Gwyneth Paltrow just like is the face of someone who has never been an underdog.
Right. She's not solid, dependable Marge.
She doesn't have a gourd-like figure. That's what he says at one point.
I think he once also calls it hers an ample derriere. Yeah. It's not nice.
Is this what you meant when you called Patricia Highsmith a poet?
Some people do feel that she had a lot of internalized misogyny in all her work.
One question we've been kind of circling is, do we feel that Ripley is relatable? Do we care about Ripley, et cetera, et cetera? And I wanted to read a reader comment and then ask a question. So the reader is Laura R. from Columbia, South Carolina, and she writes, from Mr. Ripley's initial experience with acquaintances and the subsequent tears on the boat leaving for Europe, I couldn't pull away from the developing character. Mr. Ripley's young life with his aunt informed so much with just a brief mention and almost no detail. Just enough to make me have some feelings for him. His insecurities became even a bit relatable. So I guess my question is, we are talking about how he does these bad things, he commits murder, but then also he's relatable. I'm curious, would you call him an anti-hero? Does that fit?
Well, if you take it to mean somebody who's the protagonist of the book, who's not a heroic figure, and you sort of get inside his head and find him interesting, yes, he's a great anti-hero, I think.
What are you, Sadie?
Yeah, I'd say he's kind of the definition of a good one. He holds your attention throughout. You care tremendously about his POV. but morally you don't approve. It's that kind of divide between emotion and intellect, which works for me in those characters.
I mean, morally you don't approve unless you do, right? I mean, there are times where, I don't know.
Or if not approve, though, like at least forgive.
Right. Forgive or understand.
I think overlook would be better for me.
Yeah. Okay, fine. I'm not condoning murder, to be clear.
It is really interesting. I was just remembering before he kills Dickie, he says something like, he didn't know. He realizes he wants to kill him, but he could have hit him, kissed him, or thrown him overboard. And then, of course, we know what happens.
I mean, equal options, apparently. Kissing and murder.
But Dickie gets really tiresome. I would have killed him too, right?
Yeah, he does get really tiresome.
He's annoying.
Wait, let's talk more about this. Why is Dickie tiresome?
You didn't think so? He's so petulant.
He's not very smart. You know, he's indolent. And actually, it's kind of weird that Tom wants to be him so much. He doesn't want to inhabit his intellect. He wants his ease in the world, and he wants his stuff.
Trappings.
Yeah, and he wants to be rich and not have to work for it.
I mean, don't we all? For me, I was like primed to hate Dickie. And then Tom sees his paintings and realizes that he can't paint. And that was enough of an underdog. I was like, oh, now we pity Dickie. And
no, it's pathetic. I'm sorry. He also is totally untalented. Remember in Marge is a terrible writer. She's like, I'm just going to spend half an hour writing today. And I think Tom thinks, doesn't it require a little more effort than, in between sunbathing?
They're total dilettantes. Although it does seem like their money goes pretty far.
The money thing, let's just talk about how cheap Italy was in the 1950s. Okay, so Dickie has bought the house.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Bought it. It's in what's clearly Positano, so, not bad. And then when Tom starts living it up and buying the clothes and going to Gucci, I mean, the stuff does sound good.
It does.
And doesn't Dickie's dad give him, what is it, $300?
I think
when $500? He doesn't give him very much money, and it lasts a really long time.
Yeah. Can you imagine being like, $500? I am free and set for the summer. What a dream. Well, I feel like we could talk about this book all day, but before we go, are there any last things you want to say about the talented Mr. Ripley?
Yeah, I wanted to know what you guys all thought his talents are.
Actually, I have a quote for this. I always have little quotes as backup, and I didn't get to read this. His talent, number one, his memory. I feel like you mentioned that there's so much luck that goes into how Tom evades the police.
And drunk most of the time.
And
I mean,
he's
just
drunk.
in the way in the 50s, they're all just like 10 martinis in.
He's like, I just had a couple Pernots and some gin and tonics.
But he is so excellent at remembering, okay, this is the story I told, and here's what I told this person, and here's where they were at the time, and here's when I said it. And that means that person was like, I think his memory is his great talent. He also lists off a few talents. He says he can, I don't only remember them. There's
he's a forger. He's an impersonator. He can inhabit anybody's, accent, way of talking, way of writing.
But out of
chameleon.
Out of all of that, what would you say is his big talent, to echo Sadie's question?
There's a line in one of the Saki short stories that's something like, romance on short notice was her specialty. And I think that's true of him. I think his ability to improvise in a split second where it could go either way is extraordinary. And also eyes on the prize. Like he just wants this thing and he's going to get it. He's just going to get it.
Agreed. Yeah. What about you, Sadie?
I deliberately didn't come to a conclusion, but I guess for me, it's his ability to believe his own lies and fully inhabit them seems so key to his success. And even when he is committing that one murder, and to make it plausible, to set it in his own mind, he has a fake cocktail party, which he then cleans up just so all those details will be right. But by the time he tells the lies, he believes them. And that seems a remarkable skill.
I have fake cocktail parties all the time.
Sadie, that was the quote that I had. The quote is just, his stories were good because he imagined them intensely. So intensely, he came to believe them.
Yeah. I think that's it.
So here's to believing in yourself.
That's definitely the takeaway.
Let's go to the fake cocktail party.
Well, on that note, I think that's all the time that we have. But Tina, Sarah, Sadie, I just want to say a huge thank you for joining this conversation. This was so much fun.
So much fun. Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
And readers, I want to say thank you to you for writing in and sharing your thoughts about this novel. Please keep up the conversation. We have an article page on the New York Times right now. It's titled Book Club, Read the Talented Mr. Ripley with the book review. That is where we announced that this was going to be this month's book club pick. It's also where readers are already talking about the book, so you can join the conversation there. And also, before we go, I wanted to reveal our August book club selection. In August, we will be reading My Brilliant Friend by Elena Ferrante. We just did this huge 21st Century Books project. You've heard Tina talking about it a few weeks ago on the podcast about it. My Brilliant Friend was voted the best book of the 21st century so far. So we thought, perfect for a book club. So we're going to be discussing that on August 23rd here on the podcast. And in the meantime, happy reading.
That was MJ Franklin, Tina Jordan, Sadie Stein, and Sarah Lyall in conversation about The Talented Mr. Ripley by Patricia Highsmith. I'm Gilbert Cruz, editor of the New York Times Book Review. Thank you for listening.